Welcome. So this day has finally come, and I have finally started my live chat enablement. So thank you so much, LinkedIn, for allowing me to have the license to speak to my audience live. Just a quick word about myself. So I am the founder of Elevate.Strategy, and I'm an executive coach. And over the past couple of years, I've had a great privilege of meeting a whole bunch of people and working with them. But enough about me. So I'm very excited today for our inaugural LinkedIn Live chat. And I've got a really wonderful guest with me today. I'll introduce her in a second, but first, I guess the question I have for you today is this. What are some of the biggest challenges that you faced during the COVID period as far as career? And I know there's a whole bunch of different variety of answers there, but I'm just playing around here. You guys, any chats, comments, if you type it in there, if it doesn't work, it's all right. I'll find out after the fact, and we'll make it work next time, all right? So if you're here, give a big shout out to where is it that you're from? You know, are you from North America, from global? It'd be great to know who it is in my audience is. And even in the replay, I'll find out who it is that folks are. So it'd be great to kind of meet you that way. So enough about me. So today my guest is Denise Louise. And the reason why I invited her to come is because I first met her probably about 6 months ago, and she is an exceptional executive who is vibrant, lively, and a lot of fun to speak with. And so a bit about her: she's an IT risk executive and well known for leading, large groups of, strategically prominent transformation initiatives, right? So these are highly public, global transformation projects and initiatives. And most recently, her role was 10 years with Smucker company. And some of you might be more kind of familiar with some of their jams and confectionery, but they do a lot more than that. So, but in any case, there she was serving as Director of Enterprise Risk and also as Information Governance. Now, she is a awesome business IT and risk governance executive. And so I thought I would just invite her to come and kind of speak a little bit about her career. And the purpose for this series in leadership is not so much about the business aspect of things, but more about the personal journeys. So without further ado, I'm just going to introduce Denise. And yeah, Denise, thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you on board. I just want to start off with a very fun question for you. And I've been asked, and you can feel free to introduce yourself through this question, but what phrase or saying or book title, etc., do you think would best describe or summarize your career?
Well, I think initially I would say it reminds me of the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. So I had spent quite a bit of time on the road doing consulting work and working with many different companies, primarily in the Great Lakes region, but then also wherever they happen to have any facilities too. So it took me all over the United States. But when I think about that question, I think of, to summarize my work, a book title from Brene Brown comes to mind, and it is Dare to Lead. And this kind of subline underneath that book is brave work, tough conversations, and whole hearts. And I really do think that summarizes the nature of the risk and the audit work that I had been engaged in, because sometimes it does involve a lot of bravery. It does involve sticking up for what's right and upholding standards, right? So, that sometimes leads to some tough conversations. But I go into it with my whole heart, and always with the mindset of trying to do something better for the company. But when I think about like my work and my personal goal, it's always good to great. I think of that book too, because I love the idea of taking something from so to awesome, right? So that those three things come to mind right away.
And I remember when I was working with you that that was one of the selling points, right? That we really wanted to emphasize the fact that not only were you good at what you did, but you always wanted to do even more, right? And
Right.
that's really the vibe that I get from you as well as an executive. So um, yeah, the question that's asked to me often for that is it's a very difficult question to answer because it depends on kind of what stage in your career you're in, right? So I'm
Yes.
glad you sort of gotten to the point of good to great, and I think that's one of the key themes that I often see with my clients is, if I'm trying to climb the corporate ladder, right? If I'm trying to get the better job, if I'm trying to make a transition, how do I make my life from good to great, right? And
Hmm.
that's an awesome a comment there. So. Well, what's your earliest memory then of what you wanted to be when you grew up? And was it what you're doing now?
No. My earliest memory of what I wanted to be growing up was a singer. I was one to just flit about the house singing nonstop. And I remember distinctly being in the car with my brother at some point, and I would go through, this is back when TV shows actually had like songs to kind of kick off the episode, right? I would go through every possible TV, song, commercial jingles. I mean, it was just nonstop. But when I realized, okay, maybe I'm not going to be a singer, the one thing that I did or that I was drawn to was teaching. And I realized that so much of my career actually is teaching. I
Right,
didn't
right,
actually go to study education, but there's an awful lot of awareness building and education that goes into the work. Teaching technology risk concepts to people who are not
right.
necessarily schooled in that subject, right? So, yeah.
So teaching, are you saying that teaching was your first love and vocation kind of a desire?
Yes, I would say it is. But I grew up in a very sheltered kind of environment, a little on the blue collar side. I lived in an area of Ohio that was quite depressed, economically speaking,
Sure.
and so I didn't have a lot of exposure as a young person to the different careers that are out there. I mean, it blows me away now, the types of careers that you can pursue. So yes, initially, right, I loved school, and that's just like one of the characteristics about me is I take in information all the time. I just have intense curiosity, and so school was a lot of
Mm,
fun for me. And so learning and getting to be in an environment where you continuously learn just always appealed to me. And so naturally, like I thought of
right,
teaching
right.
as that avenue, but now I realize, oh, we all in some respects should be lifelong learners.
Yep. Sure.
And I get to do some aspect of teaching in the work that I do today. It's yeah,
Yeah.
I still get to do it.
Yeah, and the way that when we converse, I learn a lot from you. I mean, even talking about some of the business aspects of what it is that you did. I'm not from a technical background. I've worked with technology people, but there's other aspects of kind of managing people around the idea of technology that I found that you were very strong at. So, hopefully that becomes something that becomes even stronger in your career. Would you ever consider leaving IT and going into public education, for example, and maybe teaching younger people?
I have not given thought to that, although there was a point in time in my career when it occurred. I've taken numerous like personal assessments over the years. And one of them, as I was an adult, kind of drew me toward education. And I realized, maybe at a college level, that's something that I would enjoy doing. At public
Hmm.
school level, not so much, but I realized that the line of work that I do, um, I was just responding to something about this on LinkedIn. As a matter of fact, we were talking about elderly folks and young folks and the cyber skills or the, just digital skills that they need to be a good digital citizen, and how that's
Right. Right.
lacking, the older generation, it kind of escaped them for the longest time. And now they've got to play catch up and don't necessarily have the wherewithal to do it. And also on the younger
Mhm.
end, just not the perspective of life to understand the online persona that you are creating and the
Right.
legacy that leaves, right? Because they are just
Right.
starting out
Right.
in life. So absolutely, there's
Sure.
applications for teaching these sorts of things to whole groups of people. And yeah, I can imagine myself doing that. Yes.
Right. Well, that's great. So, I quickly share for me, one of the earliest memories that I remember was I hosted a radio show when I was back in Hong Kong, and that really inspired me around the idea of journalism and ideas. And I've really sort of come to love that aspect of life, right, which is to share ideas with people and kind of influence one another, and that's great. So for the audience that, when you're watching the replay, or if you've got any comments here, feel free to type in the chat. But, one of the lasting elements of, and we'll talk about this at the very end about, what last impression would you want to leave on younger professionals versus the more mature ones? I'm sure we'll get to something about learning, right, as a key point across the board, right?
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
let me ask you, tell us about the nature of your work or your profession today. So what are the key highlights of the responsibilities and roles that you're asked to do typically?
So the roles and responsibilities that I have today, I would say that well, I've had two hats most recently, right? So one of the hats that I wore was helping the organization understand the major business risks that it faces, whether those are internal types of risks or external types of risks. And it could be any aspect of the business. It could be strategy, it could be technology, it could be people, it could be operations, it could be supply chain, anything, right?
Mhm.
Liquidity. It just, but you take that all in, and somehow, some way, you've got to have a means to prioritize which one of those is really the big fish that's coming after you, and are you
Right.
prepared
Right.
for it, right? Because things happen, they always happen. You kind of need to be the Boy Scout and be prepared.
Right.
But then the other
Sure.
hat that I wore, because of just years of technology experience, I mean, there's virtually nothing about business today that is not enabled with technology. And as a matter of fact, we're living in a digital age. And so even
Mhm.
more and more is being automated, and it's intricately intertwined. And you need to understand the risk relationship between all of those
Right.
people and systems and applications and data, and so it's again trying to understand the various risks that you face, whether it is someone trying to
Mhm.
disrupt your operations, like with the pipeline that happened just this past week,
Right.
or
Sure.
if it's somebody trying to steal your trade secrets, or critical, sensitive, personal information that you may be processing on behalf of your consumers, your customers, or even your employees. And
Right.
so then, are there laws that require that you protect that? But the laws are like the floor of what is expected for you to do
Right.
to protect the data. And so what
Right.
additional do you need to do? Because your systems are constantly changing, your people are changing, your business profile will change. And so how do you manage that over time?
Right.
So that's kind of been the scope of my work. And again, limited resources, limited time, limited funds. How do you prioritize and then quickly
Right.
get to the most elegant solution to address that need?
Right. Yeah, and I wonder how many folks that are listening in have sort of the same observation about, not just in the area of IT, but in the area of just business in general, right? Under the COVID circumstances, the risks
Right,
that are involved with, just even the daily operations of a company, right? There's so many
right,
folks who have said that to me that, it's almost overwhelming, right? The amount of risk that's involved with decisions that are made, right? So,
right.
anyone have any questions for Denise? Any thoughts? Feel free to type into the chat, and get engaged with the discussion, right? So, I like to say hashtag risk, right? That's something that we can we can all agree with. So, I guess very briefly though, how did you get to the point today? Like, what were the milestones to, the first entry point, and then kind of the steps that you took to get to today?
It was a winding road, let me tell you.
Yeah.
So again, grew up with a very limited, sheltered view on what to do with my career, right? And my brother insisted that I go into engineering because I was smart enough to be an engineer, and yet, like, in my mind, engineering was chemistry and physics and those sorts of things. And physics was absolutely the last class, like my worst class. So I didn't pursue that. Although I had some exposure to programming in high school, computer programming. And I mean, I took to it immediately. Like, there was just a certain beauty to the logic of a program. And I took great pride in designing something and making it perfect on paper, and then when I enter it in the system, that it would compile the first time around without like any errors. I mean, it was like a game to me.
There's a little bit of a geek factor there.
Oh,
Unspoken.
yeah, I'm a giant geek. Let's just establish that right up front. But
Right. Good.
so I went to college, and after a long conversation with my father, education was not going to be in my future. So I'm like, all right, well, I ended up going to the business school and talking to the advisor there, and the same thing, sort of thing. She said, well, you're really smart. She says, I'm going to enroll you in the honors accounting program. So honestly, that's how it started. And I thought, I didn't know much about accounting, but I'm like, it's a great foundation. And honest to goodness, I met there the very best long-lasting influence on my life. It was a gentleman. His name was Dr. Thomas J. Burns. Those of us who were fortunate enough to be his students are so incredibly blessed, because this gentleman not only taught us the foundation of accounting, and I'm not talking the bookkeeping side of accounting. I'm talking about how to value assets and understand your liabilities, understand your risks, right? We didn't even do math problems in class, really. We did theory. And week one, we had to form teams and begin debating, an accounting topic. I can't remember if I was pro or con, but in substance defeasance was this is my accounting 101 class.
You took a side, which is great.
Great. So, but in any event, he taught us about life, and he taught us to write, and he taught us to speak, and he taught that with a ferocity that I can't even imagine out of an accounting professor. And he pushed all of us to go into public accounting. So I ended up joining PricewaterhouseCoopers, and immediately noticed that, and even though I joined as a financial auditor and I understood, the fundamentals of business, I noticed right away that I wasn't like this numbers person like everybody else around me was. But what I did grasp were the big picture, the process, how things worked. And I had an opportunity very early on in my career. Pricewaterhouse couldn't find people to be IT auditors. And so they picked, a handful of employees that were, considered with great aptitude for this. And fortunately for us, sent us away to Tampa, Florida to basically get a master's degree in IT at the time. It was amazing. It was 16 weeks. And so that studying technology risk and various financial applications, let's be clear, gave me an understanding of the entire business process and how information flowed from one department to another. And it led to the study of ERP systems, and it led to additional operational matters like disaster recovery and privacy. And it ultimately allowed me to see how a whole business operates. And I think I'm rather fortunate, because I think a lot of IT folks, they kind of get pigeonholed maybe into just the cybersecurity side of things, or maybe just the data side of things. But my work has allowed me to see everything about the IT ecosystem and how it's
Mhm.
used to support the business,
Right.
the assets and the liabilities. So the opportunities and the risks, right? So that's
And you
kind of
know,
how I fell into it.
well, and on that note, we have I guess, a more technical question, but it's kind of related to what you were saying earlier. Um, so, a LinkedIn user who didn't put in their names, feel free to put in your names, by the way. Uh, so they're asking, what are some things that you look for in assessing third-party technology platforms, applications, particularly those that will have access to your customer data?
Yes,
I'll
yes.
defer to you, Denise. I know nothing about that.
Okay, so let me kind of like lay the groundwork here, what they're talking about. Um, so many companies today are going to the cloud for all manner of their IT processing. Um, they could be working with a software supplier, doing all of the data processing relative to customer data, right? So we're talking about probably personal information about a customer. Could be super
Mhm.
sensitive information like their social security number, their health information,
Right.
it could be their children's information. I mean, there's degrees of sensitivity, but nevertheless, they could process all of that on your behalf, or you could be sharing information back and forth. Like, for example, you handle all your employee processing, but you're definitely working with a benefits provider. So that
Gotcha.
said, you have an obligation as a company to make sure that you have protected that data, but now you're
Mhm.
working with third party that you just gave custody to, of that data. So now you need to understand the security measures that they have in place as well. And so there's a couple ways that you can do that. Certainly, to the degree that you're working with really sensitive information like that, that organization should have an independent audit, a technology audit that proves what are the internal controls that they have over who has access to that data. How, is it encrypted? How's it stored? Just how that whole entire ecosystem works. And
Right.
they should be providing you with a copy of that report. But that's just an annual audit that happens once a year. And frankly, by the time you get that report, I mean, that's old news. Like, that report might reveal that they had a weakness in their environment. So you really need to be actually engaged in an ongoing dialogue with that supplier if there's an issue. Because if it involves a data breach, for example, you need to
Sure.
notify,
Gotcha.
your that audience within a short time frame. Depends on the state law.
Right.
Another way of doing it is through your contractual terms, right? Like making sure that it's very clearly stated who has custody of the data, who owns the data. And really, let's be honest, if we're talking about people, the people own the data. They're just letting you borrow it for a while. And so,
Right.
but who
Right.
has custody of it, and when does that and talking about doing that assessment before you choose them as a service provider, that you're comfortable with that control environment, and that you're
Right.
doing ongoing assessments of that throughout the life cycle, and that you've also established, I call it a prenup, but
Right. Okay.
as
An
you enter
agreement.
into that
Yeah.
relationship, yeah, when the
Right. Right.
relationship is over and all this stuff sits out in the cloud, where does that data go? And have you articulated that? So those are just a few tips that I would share with people, as they're building that
Right.
out.
And you know what? I have to admit, I understood maybe about 60% of that, but that's why you're here. I
That's
love the
what,
fact that
right.
we have a question from Katya, and this is a lengthy one, but we'll take a look at that. Um, have you ever had to measure risk and opportunity that is not really measured in black or white metrics? That's a really great question. I got that a lot as a consultant from a lot of my clients. For example, patient experience, patient safety in healthcare. What is the best way to tailor solutions and showcase the benefits of? I think she got cut off because of the limit, but I guess the first part of
Yeah.
the question is, what do you think, Denise?
Yes. How do you measure that? Well, I mean, that is a perennial issue in risk management, trying to put a value and a number on things that often don't have, you're preventing an issue from happening. But there are some people who are just hardcore about having financial figures, right? So, I mean,
Right.
you could calculate the number of records that you have, and you could calculate what would the cost be if there was a breach of this information. I mean, that's just the floor of the expense that you would incur, if there were an issue. And I'm thinking again in terms of a data breach there, but really, one of the ways that you do that is you talk about your reputation risk, and and you have good examples of this in the marketplace of other organizations who may have suffered a similar issue, like that risk, if you will, was realized by them, and you can see the share that the hit that company took in terms of its shares, and its stock price in the market. That is another point of comparison. It's definitely a lot more qualitative in nature, not a great way to communicate that risk to folks, but there are people who insist on having that perspective of things. But we do try to, and we built out actually a framework that tried to measure risk in both quantitative terms as well as qualitative. And
Right.
what would that reputation hit mean to an organization, and allow them to think about what's that likelihood and what's the impact if that would happen. So
Right.
hopefully that
Right.
answers your question, Katya. Happy to chat about it further. You can contact me on LinkedIn if you
Absolutely.
need to.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's an afterplay here as well, so you can always engage Denise back after the broadcast as well.
Right.
Denise, just going back to the intention of this particular meeting, to kind of find out about your journey, I wanted to quickly talk
Yeah.
about kind of what were some of the, so you have an immense amount of knowledge now of IT and risk, and you've developed this over the years. But over the years, as you've built your career, what are some of the, strengths are relatively easy to kind of talk about a little bit, right? But what were some of the surprising weaknesses, for example, that you had to kind of work through? And I'm talking here about maybe specifically about skills, or about maybe a way of thinking, or maybe just one or two examples of that you had to really work through to kind of get through to your career as it is today.
Yeah. So the first one that comes to mind, which is frankly a lifelong battle for me,
Mm,
is I take in so much information. I mean, there is a lot of risk analysis going on in my head at all times, and I'm looking at it from every possible angle.
right.
However, when you work with executives, you need to be able to whittle that down into like the 2-minute, conversation. And it's really hard to pare that down to its essence, because in some respects, you're educating them, right? And so
Mhm.
I am as an educator wanting to tell them a little bit more than they actually wanted to hear, because I wanted to
Right.
give them the basis to not always, rely upon me to give them that advice, but to be able to make those decisions themselves. And to kind of build that skill, build that
Mhm.
muscle, right? And so that's been very difficult for me. It's a lot easier for me to put the thoughts down on paper and then
Mhm.
whittle it down. And I think of like when you're on the stove and you've got a sauce, and you slowly cook it to make it a consomme. Like it's a real
Right.
dense, really rich and really delicious, flavorful sauce.
Sure.
That's one of my biggest weaknesses, is how much do you need to simmer it? I mean, how much
Right.
do I, dish it out at a teaspoon at a time? or do I have a big old giant ladle and I'm giving them a big old mug of, to be sipping out of? So that's been one of my
Right.
biggest struggles as a weakness. And I consistently work on it, but it helps to know your audience, and to know, are you in teaching mode, or are you in, I need an
Right.
immediate answer mode, right?
Right. That's
Um,
that's a really, that's a really key difference between a senior executive and someone who's a little more junior, who has all the information, and that's kind of their ammunition, right? They're close to the data, and so they can tell. But maybe teaching or advising is something that's more senior. Yeah, gotcha.
right, right. And again, knowing your audience, knowing what they already know. So you don't have to teach them that piece of it. They get that piece, but here's the piece you don't understand, right? So, so that's been, so that's probably been something that I have will continue to hone throughout my life. Another one, I mean, obviously being in technology, for heaven's sakes, I mean, you have to constantly stay current with what's going on. The technology field, I mean, companies tend to want to do like annual planning, but in the technology field, you almost need to go on like quarterly cycles or, half year cycles and constantly stay on top of your skills. So those certifications are important. The continuing education is important. Those are, I guess I would not say that's been a struggle necessarily, but the more I advance in my career, the less I am touching those details, right? So for me, it is a challenge for me to constantly stay closer to those details, especially since I do like to see big picture and I do like to do strategic planning of how an entire ecosystem would work and helping, again, with prioritization. So those are two. Gotcha. I could tell you all about the strengths. I thought long and hard about those.
Yeah. I feel like I'm interviewing you here, right? Because there's like the classic question of what's your strengths and weaknesses, and some people turn their negative strengths into weaknesses and vice versa. So no, but I think that's a really great point, and I think that's a jump that a lot of folks, I think, and especially some of my clients have, which is going up the corporate ladder requires that you have more ability to be able to distill information into analysis and insights and recommendations, right? And when I look at your resume, I think you're progressively getting more responsibility doing that. So I can see how that's a really important strength to kind of hone in on, etc. So this is great. This is awesome. So how do you capitalize on? I guess we talked about sort of the weakness of the weakness, and I still think well, maybe you can turn that on and off as far as too much of a teaching versus sort of advising kind of a piece of it. But where have you found that to be the most impactful as far as? So has it been in board meetings? Has it been in when you're addressing a large crowd of people? Teaching versus kind of advising or recommending. Where have you been able to leverage the weakness now turned into a strength, right? So you've seen an improvement because of it. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, no, I mean, certainly working on small team projects, right? A classic example of that here most recently was we were subject to the California Consumer Privacy Act, and we were operating primarily in North America. So we didn't really have to deal with the European privacy laws. And, but yet, we were aware of them, and we knew that it was just a matter of time before that would hit, in some fashion, hit the United States, and we would need to be doing something similar. And so, yes, absolutely. Then it was teach mode, right? Because I'm working with the developers on the team because we built a custom solution. So working with those developers and working with our digital marketing team and explaining what are the implications of the law and what does it mean as we continue to design our marketing strategy going forward, as well as impart that knowledge to our legal and procurement teams, because some of these terms needed to be built into the contract. So absolutely, that was definitely a case where it was well received, because there was virtually no exposure to this information initially, and a lot. And now the whole team is well apprised. And as a matter of fact, we had to, and not just that core team, but there was a broader group that we needed to train as well. The folks at the consumer call desk, right? So should a consumer call and have a question, we need to be able to explain to them what their data rights are. And so, yeah, it's it absolutely played very well in that situation. But there are times, our executives, it has worked both ways. There have been times where I've met with our most senior leadership team, and they have very little exposure to say IT. And one of them actually was business continuity. One of them had said to me, "I've learned so much from you." And
Hmm.
it meant a lot to me to hear this individual say that, right? Because they had
Hmm.
elevated into their role overseeing a unit, but yet didn't have exposure to a really critical aspect of their business operations. And yet, I was the individual that was able to give them some of that basic knowledge that now they can
Right.
go forward with. So it has worked in all
Right.
situations. It's just, you need to be very
Yeah.
judicious when you apply it, right? So
Great.
it's a good, I
That's great.
appreciate the question. It's a good one, because I'm telling you, I weigh that one every single day.
Right. Sure. And I'm sure that that spills over into even outside of work, right? So the personal journey about being someone who, is at the dinner party with your relatives and friends and getting too much into the weeds because you want to tell them about all that but then staying on the surface. Absolutely. That's great.
Yeah, it's an occupational hazard.
So that's a good segue into um, what I want to ask you about. So there, my audience tends to be kind of 30-40% a little bit younger, and then about 60-70% a little bit more senior, right? So I wanted to ask you two questions, same questions but two different audiences. So what is one, maybe two if you'd like, tip that you would give the audience of a younger crowd, who are younger in their career, that says, what, in the future, to kind of future proof or to try to ensure that you're relevant in the market, what would you say to them? What's one skill or two skills that you would say that they should learn?
Well, the first thing I would say to them is, first of all, just like let's level set.
Mm,
Throughout your career, you're going to, I mean, we happen to have just gone through a pandemic. But
right.
there have been recessions. I can't even, I don't know. Have I been through five? I'm not even sure. Many ones, some that are specific to the industry that I'm in, right? Not necessarily
Right.
national. They're going to happen. So, and you will get
Right.
through them. So like, let's just level set with that thought right there. But when you are given an opportunity, like I did many years ago, to take a 16-week training course in IT,
Hmm.
you take advantage of those opportunities when they're given to you. You seek those out. You step
Right.
up and you
True.
ask for a bigger challenge, right? Like it,
Mm,
that every single time I've done that, that has helped me in my career and given me opportunity I never imagined, right? So follow your curiosity. You don't have to, I mean, there
right.
are people like my college roommate knew from the time she was 12 that, she wanted to be a surgeon and that's what she was going to
Right.
do.
Sure.
And I was in awe of people like that because I wasn't sure. And again, I take in all this information. And so I see many different paths that I could go. But so that's the
Right.
other thing. Don't feel like, you need to know right now that this is the path that you're on forever. You follow your curiosity. So that's the other one that I would suggest to
Mhm.
you. If you're just not sure if what you're doing right now is the thing that truly jazzes you,
Right.
take
Sure.
advantage of those opportunities and follow your curiosity where it will take you.
I love that. Hashtag curiosity. Hashtag
Yes.
curiosity. That's great. And so what would be an advice that you would give more seasoned executives, maybe someone
More
who's trying to,
seasoned.
15, 20 years, whatever it is, based on your experience?
I would say to them, to, well, don't ever rest on your laurels. Don't ever feel that anything is entitled, that you're entitled to anything. I remember very early on in my career, and it shook me. It shook me. But I was at a social function. I just joined a new company. And
Hmm.
I met a woman who was let go from that same company just a couple years earlier. And
Right.
she was the age that I am right now. And she was angry that I got hired, taking it out on me, as a matter of fact. and
Right.
and now, granted, this was a few years ago, right? So there were people who absolutely felt that when they went to work for an employer, that they would spend their entire career there, and they were entitled to their retirement and their and their years of service with that company. So never ever feel like you could rest on your laurels, and that you could just coast, right? Like, keep your skills sharp, keep your networking up and running. Like,
Right.
and networking isn't just a, hey, I'm asking for something of you, but it's a mutual exchange, right? So like, keep that up. Don't I don't know, maybe that's just because I'm an intensely curious person, always will be. So I
Right.
find great value in that sort of outreach and that sort of learning, but I'm never going to stop learning.
Right.
And then but I would also trust your gut, right? If something, if you feel stagnant, then take some steps to alleviate that, however you must. If it's teaching somewhere or mentoring a small group, and certainly, like, but now that I actually said mentoring, I think about, like, who have you deliberately helped in your career? And that may also
Yes.
help alleviate,
Yes.
some of the, okay, well, I'm maybe involved in these, same old, but if someone gave you a leg up, it's your responsibility to give others a leg up. So that would be my advice to the older crowd,
Right.
of which I'm
Uh,
in. So just clear.
yeah. Those are great, great points. Yeah, absolutely. And I would add to that, similar vein to you. Learning has an element of humility, right? That there's a degree of humility that really needs to be there. That sometimes is the actual obstacle to career progression. It's, you said it earlier around, don't feel entitled to what you have and what you should have, right? So that's a great
Right.
point. If there's any questions, guys who are tuning in, if you have any questions for Denise, please feel free to type in the chat. Um, this is not your only chance to do so, because you can connect with her afterwards, but it's a great chance for the audience to hear as well. I have one last question for you, and that's the idea of leadership. Now, one of the reasons that I took a step away from corporate and started to coach was because I felt that there was a little bit of a gap in leadership that's needed in today's world in general, but then also in business. What
Yes.
does good leadership mean to you? What are some of the attributes of a good leader that you would expect and that you would flourish under? So, what does leadership mean
Oh,
to you?
oh, well, it kind of goes back to that book title that I mentioned
Another hour.
earlier,
Everything
right?
another hour here.
But first of all, it's courage to lead. Okay.
Mm,
It is, oh man, I commented on this on LinkedIn, I don't know, a couple months ago, but there's just this dearth of leadership in
yeah.
the world today, right? And you may be looking around like, you're talking to me? Yes, talking to you. Have the courage to lead, have the courage to speak up and speak the truth, right? Um,
Hmm.
and and establish a vision for what could be. Goes back to the other book title, Good to Great. I mean, maybe
Mm,
there's people who are very comfortable just, being good, just good enough. And yes, and there are definitely some circumstances
right.
and some situations where good is all you can give at the moment, and it's all that's necessary at the moment. But if you really
Right.
want to succeed going forward in this digital age, you're going to have to pick a few things where you're going to be great. so
Right.
so
Right.
yes, what can you do to be that voice to make that happen, and to bring people along, but not to be afraid to speak up and not be afraid to share that. But leadership, I think of another angle of leadership. An important component of it is giving the other people in the room that chance to step up and show themselves, prove themselves, and making sure as a leader that you are highlighting the expertise that your team members have brought, right? There's this just big balance between, how much of it is I did this, I did that, or we as a team did this, we as a team did this. Well, yes, there are times that I led something, and there are times when my team members were really awesome and deserve credit for being incredible. And I don't want to, I don't want people to think it was purely because of my leadership. They stepped up, and I want to give them visibility. So I think it's really important for leaders to do that, and to give that leg up, give that platform to their coworkers to shine, because man, do we need the leadership today. So yeah, I have strong opinions about that, if you can't tell.
And a key word that keeps coming up in that answer is courage, right? And courage in the face of adversity. One of the things that when I was in consulting, actually when I was at one of the companies that I was working at in industry, I very quickly realized the importance of leadership, because I was sitting in a meeting one day and I was responsible for the retail operations for some of the stores, and there was just a traffic issue with some of the retail, the stores. There wasn't enough traffic. And so it was in the middle of winter. And I remember the SVP of retail operations said something out of the blue, like, let's put coffee urns at the front entrance of the doors. And, that's going to probably draw. Most people in the room kind of rolled their eyes, but I kid you not, that the next day I was touring all the stores, and there were coffee urns. And I was like, someone in that room leaked it out that was a good idea to do. And so literally from leadership top down is really what, folks will listen to and kind of follow as an example, right? And then the strange thing is, the dangerous thing is when there's execution on that and there's a cost to the company, obviously, right? So how important is courage in your day-to-day life? So when you are speaking with, partners in business, and how do you demonstrate courage?
Oh, how do I demonstrate courage? Well, I mean, one is having confidence in what I've learned, what I know, being on top of my game, technically speaking, or to understand emerging risk, right? I'm coming from a place of knowledge, of credibility. That's, I think, incredibly important. But to demonstrate the things that I'm saying and the things that I'm sharing, may be difficult things to hear. We're talking, in some cases, we're talking risk, right? Bad things that could happen. I'm also talking about great things that could happen. You gotta, there's a little bit of both going on, but just being in denial about that doesn't change the situation. So talking about it, being unafraid to talk about it, and demonstrating that all the time. And it's not, and you're not saying these things is like it's a failure on somebody's part. You're just recognizing reality, so I think just having the courage to just talk about it, to talk about business situations and possibilities that could go poorly is just a very realistic way of looking at things. But again, it's not the only way to look at things. It's also a platform to say, and how could we excel? I'll give you an example of this. I remember this was some time ago, but there were people who were like, why would we need a business continuity plan, for heaven's sakes? Disasters don't happen. That's only like if there's an earthquake or if there's a flood. Well, I mean, now look, so a few years passed, right? These are happening all over the place. This is everywhere. This is all the time. There are riots, there are this, there's that. How powerful would it be if you as an organization were able to say, not only did we face this particular natural incident, we made money that day. We kept in operation, and we did even better than we normally would do. Or we were able to donate XYZ to people in need, even though we ourselves were hit. That's what I'm talking about. Like, don't just scoff that it could never happen. Talk about when it happens, because it will happen, or like understand the likelihood of it, right? Prepare properly for it, the little Boy Scout thing again. But how cool would it be if you know, from a reputation and from a corporate citizen perspective, to be able to say that this is what we were able to do despite that. So,
Sure. Right.
but you've got to be, you got to have the courage to have that conversation.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, tackling it head on, right?
Right.
And I think when you do that, you're also empowering your team to not be afraid of bringing up issues, right? Where they can, freely talk to you and say, here's the real issue behind this, and instead of fearing that you're going to, put the hammer on them or something like that, right? So
Right.
that kind of dialogue is so important for building up teams as well. So
Right. It's a little bit of trust, and it's,
yeah.
I mean, my goodness, if your team can't come to you to say, hey, something's not quite going right here, who knows? Maybe you designed a process for a certain size of organization that you were at one point in time, but you've grown tremendously. And maybe, folks just didn't have the wherewithal to understand that, wow, this is a primarily manual process with like 5 times the volume it used to have. No wonder we're having some errors. But if your team doesn't have that courage and that trust to raise that issue, that won't get fixed, and it could turn into a much bigger issue later, right?
Right.
So yeah, you need to be able to foster and demonstrate that courage to and that transparency to have I think the best outcome.
Right.
That's just so critically important. Think of those of you who are parents, right? Of older kids. You want your kids to come to you with issues. You want them to be able to have an honest conversation. Yeah, maybe they made a mistake. But can you imagine how much worse it would be if they tried to cover it up or fix it on their own without the knowledge and the wisdom that you could bring? Like have an open conversation. It's, honest to goodness, I think it's the only way to go. Only way to go.
Right. Great. Well, Denise, we're coming up on the hour. It's been great having you as my very first guest. I'm so excited. I can't tell you how excited I am. Yeah, and I'm excited to hear from others who have not had a chance to join, but wanted to support you and support this process after the fact. Where can people find you? Are you open for contact and connection? And what's the best way to reach you?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'm of course on LinkedIn,
Okay.
and I am open to virtually all invites. There are a few that, maybe just seem a little fishy and I won't necessarily agree to, but absolutely, if you've got a legit question, you want to connect with me, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's the best place to find me, at least for the time being.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Denise. And I'm going to let you go, but have a great week, and I'll chat with you real soon.
Okay. Thank you, Simeon. I appreciate that you asked me to do this, and my best wishes to you as you launch this particular series. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, guys, that was awesome. I really enjoyed that conversation. I hope you guys did too as well. So just to keep the momentum going, next week, again, this series is about personal journeys, right? It's and in the midst of that, as we talked about today, there's going to be technical business questions that's great to raise as well. But next week, we're going to have a managing director from Deloitte, and his name is Brian Baker. And I'm so glad to have secured him as well. He was one of my mentors when I was at Accenture, when he was there as well. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be probably the same time next week, but Brian Baker will be there, and stay tuned to announcements on LinkedIn as well. All right. So in the meantime, if you have any questions or anything else, please feel free to reach out. If you have any recommendations, or if you would like to come up on my live chat as a guest, feel free to reach out. That'd be great as well. All right. So take care. Have a great week.